Hello and welcome back. This is the week 15 lecture, and this will be the final lecture of the semester. So today we're obviously talking about Essay 4. I just want to go over some important things. Some of this might be a little bit of review. I want to sort of go back to a few things we've mentioned before, but I also want to talk about two things that we haven't really talked about yet this semester, at least not here in lecture: research and citation rules. So these haven't been things that we've had to worry about with our first three essays because there was no research component with those earlier essays. But obviously here with Essay 4, it is different. This is an argumentative research paper. So we are conducting some outside research. I included some information about research in the week 14 module. So I know I didn't post a lecture last week, but if you went inside the module, if you opened up the overview, as you hopefully have been doing each week, you saw some information there about how to get started on your research. So I want to start there because if you haven't started doing some research yet for Essay 4, it's time now. Here in the early stages of week 15, it would be good to start looking around for sources. So just a couple of quick tips. You guys might want to sort of follow along with some of these steps as I'm talking, especially when I get to the GBC library databases, because I really want you guys to use those. At least try to find one source from the databases, because it's really good for you to get familiar with the library homepage and with the databases, because you're going to be using those in English 102. You're going to be expected to be somewhat familiar with how to do some online research using those databases, and they're great resources. They are free for any GBC student. You're always guaranteed to find excellent sources, to find reliable, scholarly sources in those databases. So we'll talk more about those. But first, the first thing you should really do, once you have selected the essay from the book that you're going to work with, so now you know the topic that you're going to be addressing, and you might have at least some idea about the argument that you hope to make. Once you have some of that basic stuff in mind, go ahead and hop online and just start with some really easy stuff. Start with a simple Google search about your topic. Just see what's out there. Okay, see some of the search results that you get. Now, the problem with Google, and the reason we can't utilize it as our only research tool, is, you're going to find good stuff. I mean, there's good stuff on websites. You're going to find, some good information this way, but you're going to get a ton of search results. As we know, you guys have done Google searches before. You know that you're going to get way more results than you could ever realistically look through. I mean, you can't look through all of them. And the problem is some of those results are not going to be very good. Some will be good, some will be bad, and some will be, somewhere in between. So it's just kind of a crapshoot. And you have to sift through a lot of bad sources in order to find the good. But if you are researching something like light pollution, or, refugees in Europe or Asia, or just like some of these really big topics that we do find in 50 essays. Now, of course, it depends on what essay you've chosen. By this point, you should at least know your topic. A lot of these topics, a lot of the really big ones, a lot of the really broad ones that sort of tap into a current issue or something that people are talking about right now, there's going to be tons of stuff on those topics. So when you do a Google search, you're going to stumble upon some pretty decent info. You're going to be able to start finding some pretty good stuff. But you don't have to commit to anything right away. Just do your Google search and just kind of take a look at some of those top search results. They're mostly going to be websites, but some of those websites might be good, and even if you don't end up using them necessarily as sources on your paper, you can just read a few of them and just learn. This is kind of a process of learning. Remember when I was talking about ethos, when I was talking about, those artistic appeals, one of them is ethos, which is largely tied to your credibility as the writer. So part of credibility is knowledge, showing that you are knowledgeable about your topic, demonstrating that to your audience. So you sort of need to do a little bit of reading. You need to gather more information about the topic than just what you find in the essay in our book. You have to become pretty knowledgeable about it in order to make a good argument. So just take a look and just start reading some of the sites that seem to contain good info. But when you're deciding where to go and what results to click on, let me just say a few things that might help about websites. Okay, because I want you guys to start thinking a little bit more critically about websites and what websites we are using, what websites we are reading. Now, of course, when you're just at your leisure and you're just reading stuff for entertainment, I don't care where you go. I don't care what websites you're looking at. But when you're doing research, you need to be aware of where the research is coming from, where the information is coming from. There's sort of a hierarchy of websites when it comes to credibility and reliability. So I want to mention the best kinds of websites so you guys can try to primarily use those. So we generally like websites that end in certain letters, okay? So when you're looking at the web addresses, look for these endings. Look for .orgs, .govs, and .edus. Those are generally going to be reliable sites, and you're going to find a lot of good stuff there more often than not. So .orgs, the org is short for organization. These tend to be, though they're not always, nonprofit organizations, which means a lot of times they're not necessarily trying to sell you anything or make money. They're often involved in sort of, charitable efforts or, humanitarian causes, raising money perhaps for good things, but it's not like a commercial interaction. They're often trying to get information out, or they're trying to sort of create some kind of activism, or they're trying to mobilize people maybe to do something. But often that information will be reliable. Also, .govs, that's short for government. Now, I understand we might not always trust everything that we hear from our government, but what you have to keep in mind is these are like government agencies. And government agencies don't tend to be overly political. Like, it's not really about Democrats versus Republicans if you're reading something on the Department of Agriculture's website, right? The Department of Agriculture is not super politicized, and if they're putting information out there, it's probably going to be good information. That's, stuff that's data that's been collected probably by scientists and other experts that are employed by the government or consult the government. And again, they're just working for this particular agency. So it's not like they're running for president trying to get you to vote for them. It's really just about getting accurate info out there so people can understand things, make decisions. And then finally, we like .edus because edu is short for education. So those are websites that are usually created and maintained by colleges and universities. So again, often we have professors, experts in the field, publishing stuff. We might have students like advanced undergrads or maybe graduate students also contributing. But that stuff is going to be peer-reviewed, it's going to be vetted, and it's going to be reliable. So if you're stumbling upon websites that end in those letters, you can take a look. I mean, certainly there's going to be good information on some of those sites, but we tend to want to avoid .coms. Com is short for commercial. So these are commercial websites, which means they're usually owned and maintained by private businesses that are trying to make money. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? I mean, I don't have a problem with private businesses making money, but when we're doing research, we just have to be cautious because often there might be an angle. The information that we're getting from .coms might be geared towards, selling us something or getting us to make some kind of a commitment to the company, and that's not always conducive to good research. The one exception to that rule is if you're looking at the website of a newspaper or a national news magazine. Like if you go to the Wall Street Journal's website or the New York Times website, those are going to be .coms because they are owned and maintained by those newspapers, and those papers are probably owned by some private company if they're not a company unto themselves. So those are .coms, but if it's just the online version of a newspaper or a national magazine like Time or Newsweek, that's fine. If that's just the place where you're going to read issues of this newspaper or this magazine, that's okay. But otherwise, we want to avoid .coms for the most part. Okay, so you can start just by doing a little surfing and seeing what's out there. Also, if you do that initial Google search and you notice that there is a Wikipedia page for your topic, I actually do recommend that you take a look at that page. Now, keep in mind, we cannot use Wikipedia as one of our sources, never, because Wikipedia is an open source, which means anybody can post information there. I could do it, other experts in the field could do it, but also just anybody off the street who feels like it can also change information or add new information. So we can't use Wikipedia as a source. It's not quite reliable enough for that, but it does have a really big value if we can use it the right way. So what I always recommend is if there's a Wikipedia page about your topic, click on it, take a look, and you should be able to tell pretty quickly if it's a good Wikipedia page. I actually like Wikipedia, but you have to find the good pages, and you can tell. Okay, good pages are usually created by people who know a lot about that particular topic. They might just be regular people, lay people, but they have a lot of knowledge. But often if it's an academic topic, as many of ours will be, we can kind of consider these academic topics because they're often written about in school, they're often studied, analyzed by scholars, by professionals, by experts. So whenever you're dealing with a topic like that, the Wikipedia page probably will have references. So if you can read through the page, like I did an example of this in my live class. We were searching for light pollution, just a potential topic that we could have pulled from 50 essays from the Klinkenborg essay. And we found an excellent Wikipedia page. You guys can look at this yourselves, even if you're not doing light pollution. Just as an example, search for light pollution, go to the Wikipedia page. You can read it if you want, but the main thing I want you to look at is at the bottom of the page. If it's a quality Wikipedia page, there will be a reference section. Okay, this is how you know that somebody respectable has done it. There will be a reference section, essentially like a works cited page, where the author of that Wikipedia page will list his or her sources. And if you see that, not only will you see a list of sources, you should see some links to those sources. So again, this should be at the bottom of the page. It's usually just called references. Sometimes it might be called works cited. But in that reference list, you should be able to access some of the same sources that the author of the page used. And if it's a good page, then those sources are probably good too. Now, this is a little bit hit or miss, because as you'll see, if you start playing around with this in Wikipedia, you're not always going to be able to arrive at those destinations. Some of those links that you click on in the reference section, they might be broken, they might be old, they might no longer take you to an active site, but a lot of them still work. A lot of them are still active. But then the question becomes, will you be able to get free access to the article or the book that the author of the page was using? Sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes the answer is no, but just remember this: if you click on a link and you go to a web page and you see what looks like a really good article on light pollution or whatever your topic is, but then you notice that you have to pay for it, that the website wants you to like sign up for a subscription or pay for the article, don't do that. You should never do that. You should never pay for research. The reason being, we have the GBC library databases, which, like I said, are free for all GBC students. So if you find an article that looks good, but you don't want to pay, you should never pay. Just write down the title of the article and maybe the author of that article, and then you can find it. Most likely, you can find it later in the library databases. But it's always good to just spend a few minutes going through that reference list at the bottom of the Wikipedia page and just see what you can find. You might be able to track down a really good source that way. Maybe not. You might get tired of looking at broken links, or you might get tired of hitting paywalls, and after 4 or 5 failures, you can just move on. But my guess is if your topic's popular, you'll at least find 1 or 2 potentially good sources just by looking at the references. And you might be able to grab a PDF or some other file that you can save or download or even print if you want. Okay, but that's just a way to get started. That's a way to start reading a little bit more about your topic. You can see kind of what's out there. What are other people talking about? What have other people said about it recently? Of course, we want most of our sources to be pretty recent. You don't really want to get stuff from the 70s or the 50s unless you're specifically talking about stuff that was going on then, right? Things change. Knowledge gets updated. Right? There's new innovations, new breakthroughs, new discoveries. So we tend to want most of our sources to be pretty recent. And by looking at Wikipedia, by just looking at some of the good websites in your Google search, you'll be able to get a general idea of sort of what's going on with your topic right now, or what's been going on in recent years. Okay? And you might even be able to find a good source. Now, the next thing you can try is Google Scholar. So this is a better version of Google. It works just like Google. You can go to Google right now and just type in Google Scholar, and you'll find a better set of search results. Again, it's just like Google. You can just scroll through your results, click on whatever you want. But the good thing about Google Scholar, the reason we like it is, well, it's in the name. It's scholarly. So you guys, and you'll learn more about this in 102. We don't have time to spend a lot of energy on it here at the end of 101, but you will in time start to distinguish between what we consider like academic sources versus more sort of popular publications, right? And sometimes popular publications can be helpful, but generally when we research, we want academic, scholarly sources because they're the most reliable. Not only because they've been written by experts, doctors, scientists, professors. It's not only that. It's also that they've been peer-reviewed. That's very important, and that separates them from a lot of stuff that you're going to find on popular websites or in popular publications. Peer review means that when the scientist writes his article, before that article gets published, it has to get reviewed by other scientists, by other experts in that field. It has to get sort of vetted and edited, and people weigh in on it and they determine if it's accurate or not. And before it gets published, it has to be approved by multiple colleagues, multiple peers of the writer. And only then will it be published and will it appear in an academic journal, or maybe on an EDU somewhere? It ends up on an EDU website. But because of that peer review process, we can trust the information. It's not just one guy who's saying it, right? His colleagues agree. Other people have read it, reviewed it, and have decided that it's good. Okay, so we can trust it. And when you go to Google Scholar, or when you go to the GBC library databases, all the sources that you find are going to be peer reviewed. All of them. That's just the way it is. I mean, in the databases, you'll also find some newspaper articles, and those aren't technically peer reviewed in quite the same way, but journalists have editors and fact checkers who still review their work. So we can trust most of that as well. And that's what makes the GBC databases and Google Scholar better than just a regular Google search, because you're going to get a higher quality of sources. You're going to get, only the scholarly, peer-reviewed academic sources. So again, with Google Scholar, though, you're going to run into the same potential problem that you do looking at the references in Wikipedia. You're not going to be able to get free, full access to all of the sources that you find in Google Scholar. Some of them, again, you'll click on some of these links and you'll end up on some web pages where you might be hitting paywalls, or they might be trying to get you to sign up for something. So you can always just bail at that point. But in some cases, you're going to find PDFs. You might find HTML files that you'll be able to read, save, download, particularly PDFs. You can always download those. And if you find something that looks really promising and you really think you're going to use it, I would recommend printing, especially if it's not a terribly long article. So just keep in mind, we're looking largely for articles from newspapers, from magazines, and from academic journals. So academic journals are kind of like magazines, but they usually only come out a couple of times a year. They have a very specialized audience, right? Because it's mostly other academics, other professors, other experts, maybe advanced college students, graduate students use these journals and publish articles in these journals. So these aren't things that are, out there at the supermarket. You're not going to pick one of these up when you're checking out at the grocery store. These are like scientific journals, or there's going to be journals of social science like sociology, psychology. Basically, any academic discipline will have its own academic journals. So within English, we have journals that are all about, American literature or British literature, right? You're going to find that with any discipline. So again, regular people don't read these, but students do, professors do, right? People who are well-versed and experts in that field will read these. And again, you're not going to buy them at stores, but you can always find them in these kinds of databases, Google Scholar and the GBC library databases. So if you find, say, a scientific journal, the article that's going to be in there, the article that you might be using that's in there, it's going to be kind of long. It might be pretty dense, but there's going to be tons of good evidence in there. There's going to be numerical stuff, statistics. There'll be expert opinions, maybe some graphical evidence, all kinds of stuff that you might be able to use later in Essay 4. So you just need to kind of be aware of the basic difference between a newspaper article, from a local newspaper or a national newspaper, and then like a magazine article from like Time or Newsweek, and then an academic journal article. They're all going to be a little different. They're all going to be a little bit different in terms of length, in terms of sort of their style, how they're written. Newspaper articles tend to be pretty short. A magazine article like from Newsweek would be a little bit longer, and then that academic journal article might be longer still. So I know sometimes it's easy to maybe avoid the academic journal stuff because it's harder, it's more difficult to read, it's longer. but you only need two sources. So if you have one really good scholarly source, and then maybe something shorter that you found from a newspaper or a good website as your other source, that would be a nice middle ground. That would be a nice balance to strike. I don't expect you guys to read a ton of academic journal articles. You sort of have to be trained on how to do that. But you can certainly get one. You can get one, you can use one, and again, another thing that's cool about EDUs, those websites maintained by schools and universities, is you're often going to find academic articles republished on those kinds of websites. And in some cases, they might even be summarized or shrunk down a little bit for ease of reading. So if you can ever find that kind of situation, you might want to jump on it. But again, research is all about just taking some time and looking. Don't expect to find your best sources in 5 minutes. You might have to spend a couple of hours looking around at some stuff before you settle on your sources. But yeah, use Google Scholar, see if you can find anything good that way. And then finally, the library databases. So if you're online right now, you might try to just hop on, go to the GBC homepage, and then when you're on that homepage, you should see a tab for the library up top. I think it's in the upper right-hand corner of the homepage. If you click on that, you'll go to the library homepage. I think I just froze there for a moment. So once you're on the library homepage, you might be prompted to log in. So you guys have to figure this out. You got to make sure that you can log into the library homepage. You should be able to use the same info that you use to log into other things. It might ask for your GBC email. All of you have a GBC email. Even if you're not using it, you do have it. You can find it. You might also be able to enter a phone number, and then it's probably going to ask for a password. I know for me, I use the same password that I use to log into Google, to Canvas, and to my email. So maybe it's the same for you guys. I'm not quite sure. It might be a little bit different for students, but you can try the same login info that you use for Canvas. See if that works. If it doesn't, and you're having some trouble, you might have to create a new password, or you might have to contact computer services, technology services at GBC. They can set a new password for you and make sure that you can get in. But you have to figure this out, not just for this paper, but for the future. Because once you're in 102, it's just going to be assumed and expected that you can access the library database. You're not just going to be able to say, hey, I can't log in, so I guess I can't do scholarly research. You got to figure it out, even if that means calling tech services and having them kind of walk you through it. Okay, and that's never fun, but I've done it. I've been locked out before. I've done it. They're helpful. It might only take, 10, 15 minutes. Okay, so get into the library. And once you're logged in, you should be able to scroll down on that main page and you'll see a link to databases. So there's several links. One to the catalog, one to like ebooks. There's a bunch of other options, but one that you'll see should be databases. Click on that. Okay, then you're going to go to a new page that's all about databases. Now you're going to notice an alphabetical list of databases. You can certainly check that out, but there's a whole bunch of them in there, and unless you know exactly what you're looking for, you might get lost. So my recommendation is skip the alphabetical list. We don't need all of them. And scroll down a little bit more. You should see links to 2 databases, which are the 2 most popular, the 2 most commonly used by undergraduates. And you'll see them right there on the database page. EBSCO and JSTOR. Those are the only 2 that you need. Really, EBSCO is all that you need. So click on it. Click on EBSCO. And if you haven't been prompted to log in yet, you might be prompted to at this point, okay, before you can actually get into EBSCO. So get all that squared away. And then once you're in EBSCO, it works just like Google, okay? You type in your search terms, you type in your topic or some specific aspect of your topic, okay? And you just look through the search results. You see what you come up with. Not all of those results are going to be helpful for you, but some will be. And again, just like Google Scholar, all of your search results here in EBSCO are going to be high quality sources. You can be assured of that. Okay? And there's no question about being able to get access to them. This is why, once again, the databases are the best. Our databases are the best. Because any article that you find, as long as you're searching for full text, and that's an option. You'll see it should be on the left-hand side of your screen. Once you start searching, you can narrow your search results by date of publication, by what type of publication you're looking for. You can look only for newspaper articles. You can look only for academic journal articles, and don't forget about books as well. I know we don't have time to read a whole nother book as an outside source, but if it's an academic book, chances are it's got a bunch of chapters, and maybe you can just use one of those chapters if it's relevant, if it's helpful to you, and if you can gain access to that book online. But as you guys know, there's a ton of ebooks nowadays, so a lot of these books are going to be accessible. You don't have to read the whole thing. You might just be able to find one chapter that you can read and use as a source. But anyway, make sure that you're only searching for full text, because if you can't get the full text of the source, what's the point? You can't really use it if you don't have the whole thing. So make sure that you're searching only for full text, and then everything you find, all of those search results, will have either a PDF or an HTML file that you can read, save, print, whatever. Okay, and once you find something good, save it, download it. You might even want to create a new folder just for, research. You don't want to try to have to come back and find these again later. That's wasted effort. That's wasted time. If you find a good source, save it, put it somewhere where you can find it later. I still print some of mine if I know I'm going to be working with them a good bit. Just make sure you hang on to them. Okay, and make sure you can see the name of the author, the title of the article, and where the article originally appeared. I want to be really clear. These articles did not originally appear in Google Scholar or EBSCO. Those are databases, okay? What you need to tell me on your works cited page is also where they were originally published. What newspaper? What magazine? What book? What academic journal did this piece originally appear in? And that information is always going to be there. You just have to make sure you're paying attention when you find the source. Write down some of that key info, or if you're just saving it, downloading it, printing it, it should be there on the page, okay? And if you're having trouble, email me if you're having trouble figuring some of this out. But you're going to be responsible for the basic information about this source. So you need to make sure you know the author, you know the title, and you know where it came from. Okay, you're also going to need to know the publication date. All of that will end up on your works cited page. Okay, so if you have any questions about research, let me know. Use my tips. And if you're having trouble finding sources, let's talk. But you really do need to get moving on research early this week. Okay? So let's talk briefly about citation rules. I've included some stuff about this in the Week 15 module. So please take a look at my overview. I have a lot of helpful documents as well. So spend some time in the Week 15 module just taking a look at what I've posted. I have a document called Citation Help. I have another one called Quote Sandwiches that I think you guys need to use at least a little bit as you're working on Essay 4. Okay, because we talked a little bit about some of the inartistic appeals that you're going to find in your sources. Right? So you're going to find some numerical evidence. You're going to find some testimonials, right? The words of others. These can often take the form of expert opinions. The author of the article or book chapter might be, should be, probably will be an expert. Okay, so whatever they're saying, right, could be considered to be expert opinion. So that's great. You're going to have a lot of good info at your disposal. But here's the thing. We have to cite that info. Okay? When you're doing research, it's great to find stuff, to find evidence that can support your claims. That's the whole point of doing this. And in some cases, we might use research as an example of the opposing viewpoint, and we can then argue against it. And it's great to do that. This is a great way to boost our papers, to make our papers stronger. But what you have to remember is that the information that we're finding in these sources, that information does not belong to us. We did not do the work. We did not write the articles. So we have to cite that information. It's very important that we do it correctly, because if we don't, we might be guilty of plagiarism, even if it's unintentional. So if you take information from sources and fail to cite it properly, you have essentially stolen that information. You've taken somebody else's work and you have passed it off as your own. Okay? And that's intellectual theft. That really is the definition of intellectual theft, intellectual dishonesty, and it's one of the worst things you can do in college, really, because you are stealing somebody else's ideas. You might be stealing somebody else's words. You're stealing somebody else's work. And obviously, we don't want to do that. So when we're using our sources in our papers, we have to be aware of two levels of citation. Okay, we have the in-text citation that appears in our paper right after we've used a source. So whether we're quoting a source, whether we are summarizing it, putting some of those ideas in our own words and shrinking it down, doesn't matter. Whenever we are using that source, we have to provide an in-text citation in our paper at the end of whatever sentence we are using the source in. So I've shown you some examples in the Week 15 module. These are often called parenthetical citations. Also, it means the same thing. In-text, parenthetical, same thing, because they appear inside parentheses. Okay, so when you're citing your source, typically your in-text citations are going to be very simple and very short. Okay, if you have an author of your article and you have a page number, then you're good to go on the in-text citation. That's all you need. The last name of the author and the page number where you're getting this info. That's it. So let's say it's an article written by me that you're using on your paper. You would simply put inside the parentheses Lackey, not my first name, not my first initial, okay, just my last name, followed by a page number, 31. Lackey 31. There's no punctuation in between, okay? There's nothing else. We don't need other words. We don't need other info. Just the last name and the page number, okay? And then the period ending that sentence comes after the parentheses. So you should think of these in-text citations as being part of your sentence, okay? They are the final part of that particular sentence. So you end the sentence after the parentheses. Okay, so that's in-text citations. Now, if you have multiple authors, like if you have two authors of the article that you're using, you'll have to include both of those names. There can be some variations. And again, if you look at my citation help document, I'm showing you what a few different in-text citations look like. If you're using scientific stuff, like scientific articles often have multiple authors. A lot of science stuff gets published collaboratively. So if you have a bunch of authors, you can use an abbreviation known as et al. That's ET followed by AL period. That's two separate words. It's Latin meaning and others. So et, that's ET space AL period. You can do that as an abbreviation if you have more than two authors. You can just use the last name of the first author who appears on the article, followed by that abbreviation et al., which means there's a bunch of others, but I don't have the space to list them all here. Okay? And then you would just put the page number after that. Most of your articles or book chapters should have page numbers. Okay? You just might have to look a little bit, but they should have them. Now, if you're getting some information from a good website, as we know, websites don't always necessarily have page numbers. So if you don't have page numbers, that's fine, okay? You don't have to include that in the in-text citation or later on the works cited page. In some rare cases, you might not have an author. Some articles are published anonymously. That's not super common, but it's not unheard of. So in the event that you don't have an author, you would use an abbreviated version of the title. Okay, the title of that article. If it's a long title, you really just need to grab the first 3 or 4 words of the title. And remember, article titles go in quotation marks. Bigger things get italicized, like the titles of books, the names of newspapers, magazines, or academic journals. Those get italicized. The names of websites and the names of databases all get italicized because those are big things. Littler things like articles, those titles go in quotation marks. You need to remember that when you're doing citations. Okay, so remember, in-text citations are short and sweet. They're inside parentheses and they are in the body of your paper. Okay, and they are required anytime you are quoting or summarizing information from your sources. Okay, some students get confused and they think, oh, I only need to do in-text citations if I'm doing direct quotes. If I'm not quoting the author, if I'm using my own words, I don't need it. That is not true, okay? Because if you are summarizing ideas that you found in the article, if you're summarizing research that was done by this scientist in the article that's discussed in the article, you still have to cite it, even if you're summarizing it in your own words, because you didn't know all of that before you read the article. You didn't do all of the work that's being discussed in your summary. So you still need the in-text citation. And the in-text citation will look the same whether you're quoting or summarizing. Okay? It doesn't matter. The only difference is if you're quoting your source, obviously you're going to put their words in quote marks followed by the in-text citation, whereas if you're summarizing their words, you don't need quote marks because the words are yours, but the in-text citation is still obviously required, okay? Just remember, if you didn't know it, if you didn't do it, you have to cite it, okay? You have to give credit where credit is due, all right? So we have to have in-text citations in Essay 4. This is not optional. This is not something, I didn't really feel like doing them. I forgot. What's the big deal? I really can't grade your paper if you don't have in-text citations, because even if you did not mean to plagiarize, if you give me a research paper that doesn't have any in-text citations, I already know that you plagiarized. Like maybe it was an honest mistake, but by definition, you have plagiarized. If you did in fact use your sources in the paper and you just did not provide in-text citations for them, you plagiarized, okay? I'm sorry to break the news, but you have. So the only grade I would be able to give a paper like that is an F, okay? So the best I can do, if you give me a paper with no in-text citations, I will try to message you and say, you need to add your citations if you want me to grade this. And if you can do it in time, great. If not, that's really it as far as essay 4. I mean, it's gonna get a failing grade, and there's really nothing we can do about it. So just be careful and make sure you're paying attention to in-text citations. All right, and then the second level of citation, as we know, is the works cited page. Okay, so some of you have done these before. I have not required any works cited pages for any of the previous essays because I was not requiring research. But for essay 4, you must have a works cited page. Again, if you don't have one, I'm going to kick the paper back to you and say, give me a works cited page if you want this to be graded. Because again, if you don't have a works cited page, I can't check your citations. You might have in-text citations, but I need to match those up with the works cited page. Okay, so I'm asking for you guys to have 2 sources. If you have 3, that's okay. I really don't want you to have many more than that because then you might kind of drown in all of the sources. But most of us are going to only have 2. So that means the works cited page will be short, but that's fine. It still gets its own page. Okay, so the length requirement for essay 4 is 4 to 6 pages. So if you've written 4 full pages, which you must do to meet the minimum requirement, that means that the works cited page would be page 5, okay? And if you've written 4.5 pages, right, if your essay ends around the middle of page 5, don't shove the works cited page in at the very bottom of page 5. The works cited should be page 6. It gets its own page. It's important enough to warrant that. Okay, so it gets its own page, it gets its own title. The title should be works cited. Okay, treat it just like the title of your essay. Center it, okay, put it at the top of the page, and then you have your sources listed. So the works cited page, those citations are going to be longer and more detailed than those little short in-text citations that you did in the body of your paper. Okay, so like I said, you need to be aware of the basic info of all of your sources because you're going to be responsible for all of that on the works cited page. So I give you some examples in the week 15 module, but typically with articles or book chapters, anytime you have an author, you start with the author's name, last name first, okay, then the title of the article, again, that's going to be in quotation marks, followed by the name of the publication where that article originally appeared. So that's the name of the newspaper, the name of the magazine, the name of the academic journal, and those get italicized. And then you're going to have date of publication along with like volume number, issue number, and that's going to depend on what source it is, right? Newspapers don't have volumes, but academic journals do, all right? But basically all of these publications will have page numbers. And if they do, those have to be included in the works cited entry along with the data. If you use the database to find it, typically that will be the final thing in your works cited citation. So if you used EBSCO, you would put it there at the end. Again, look at my examples, and you would italicize that. You would italicize EBSCO. If you use Google Scholar, that's also a database. You could also put that at the end of the citation. So just use my examples. You don't have to memorize all of this stuff. What you have to do to be a good researcher and to create correct citations is you just need to know what kind of source you're dealing with, right? Okay, I have a newspaper article here. Let me look at Lackey's examples. Let me find an example of a newspaper article and make sure that my citation looks like that citation. And if you don't want to use my examples, you can find plenty of other examples of MLA style citations online. Okay, you can go to the Purdue OWL website. That's a great resource. You can find other websites, often maintained by schools and universities, that give you these MLA citation rules. But remember, we are using MLA. That's the citation style that we always use in English classes. You'll use different styles in different classes. But I don't want APA. I don't want Chicago. Your citations are incorrect if you are doing them in APA or Chicago style. That's not what we use in English. You guys have to get used to these differences. In English, it's always MLA. Always. Okay? So if you're looking up the citation rules, if you're looking for examples, search for MLA citation rules and ignore stuff for APA or Chicago. That's very important. So again, find good examples that match the type of source that you're using, and then just follow the example. They're going to show you all the pieces of information that you need to include. They're going to show you what the works cited page should look like. Just make sure yours looks like the example. And you have to format the works cited page properly, right? So we use that hanging indent. You'll see that in my examples. So that means the first line of each works cited citation is not indented, but all lines after the first line will be indented. So it's just kind of the opposite of what we normally do with paragraphs. Just pay attention to that. Make sure you're double spacing the works cited page just like you double spaced your entire paper. Just basic formatting rules need to be followed. So use my examples, use other examples, make sure you're looking at MLA. And you might know that there are citation generators that you can use online. In fact, you'll even have access to one if you're using the GBC library databases. And you can get these machines to automatically generate your works cited citations. I don't have a problem with that. That's modern technology. I didn't have that when I was young. I'm a little bitter. We always had to do these ourselves, but that's great. But if you're going to use that service, you're going to have to choose the citation style that you want, okay? So make sure that you're choosing MLA, because otherwise the generator is going to give you the wrong style, and then that's going to come back to hurt you. So make sure you're choosing MLA, and just double check. If the citation that the generator has created looks like the examples that I'm posting or that you're finding online, then it's probably fine. Go ahead and get it into your works cited page. Okay? So I'll go ahead and wrap up because this is a very long lecture. If you have any questions about research or about citation rules, please let me know. These are very important. I know we're shoving them into the very end of the semester, but I want you guys to work hard this week on the research and the citations. You have plenty of time, okay? And if you blow off the citations, like I said, you're going to have to resubmit your paper, because I really cannot grade Essay 4 if you don't have at least a handful of in-text citations and a works cited page. You have to be covering both levels of citation for me to give you a grade. That's just the nature of this kind of work. And don't plagiarize, okay? It's easy for me to tell. Of course, that's been the case all semester. Okay, so just a quick thought about timeline before we sign off. So this is the final week of class at GBC. So like I said, this is the final lecture, and this is our final weekly module here in week 15. So the only thing that remains after this week is final submission of Essay 4. So if you guys look at the week 15 module, you'll see that I want you to turn in rough drafts at the end of this week, okay? And that is a requirement. I'm not going to be grading those really harshly. This is only worth 50 points. It's kind of a completion grade. I just want to see that we have rough drafts finished by the end of the week. And if you have one, even if it's pretty rough and you still need to work on it a good bit, I'll give you the full 50 points. I just want to see that we are following the steps of the writing process. So you should have an outline by now. I asked for that at the end of last week, and I'm sorry if I confused anybody. I didn't provide a lot of instruction because everybody outlines in their own way. I just wanted you to outline Essay 4. Doesn't mean that you have everything figured out, but it just means that you're thinking about the essay and you have some kind of a plan for the essay. All right, so keep outlining though. You don't have to be done with that. Keep outlining, keep planning, keep writing down claims. Keep thinking about how you're going to organize your body paragraphs. Like I've been saying, once you have a lot of good claims, obviously the biggest, most central claim is going to be your thesis, but you're also going to have some good supporting claims that can become the subjects of body paragraphs. You can start writing topic sentences, start announcing those supporting claims in the form of topic sentences that can introduce your body paragraphs. So if you have 4 or 5 good supporting claims, well, now you might have 4 or 5 body paragraphs that you can build around those claims. And you can bring in your reasons, you can bring in your evidence, the appeals created by you, and then also the inartistic appeals that you're finding through research. So that's kind of how we want to get organized. That's how we want to start planning our bodies. So you should be continuing to do that here in the early part of this week, but also spend a little bit of time on research. And then later in the week, start drafting. Once you have a good outline, you can start working on a rough draft. Give yourself a few days to put together the rough draft. So you should be writing that early draft of Essay 4 by the weekend, maybe Friday. Give yourself the weekend to put it together. Now, you don't really have to revise and edit the rough draft. Just get it done. I would love for them to be complete, and they need to at least be close to complete, okay? And get those submitted at the end of the week. I will look at them very briefly. I can't offer detailed feedback because I have a million of these and I have to get through them in basically one day, but I will turn them around very quickly. I'll give you a little bit of general feedback. Like if I see major problems, like you don't have a thesis or this isn't an argument, then I'll definitely tell you that. But I can't get super detailed, but I'll give you some general feedback. I'll let you know if you're on the right track or not, and I'll do that by Monday, probably the end of the day on Monday of exam week. So exam week begins next week. We don't have an exam, of course, we're just submitting our final draft. So you should have my comments back at the beginning of next week, and then you have until the 15th, December the 15th, which I believe is a Thursday. So that's the Thursday of next week. That's when final drafts are due. So once you've gotten a little bit of feedback on your rough draft, you'll have about 3 days to complete the post-writing steps. That means revising and editing. Please don't neglect those, okay? There's a reason I'm giving you until the 15th. I want to give you plenty of time to revise and edit. And it's even more important now. It's always important to revise and edit, but it's even more important when there's a research element, because you have to double check your citations. You have to make sure that you're including in-text citations when it's necessary. You have to make sure your works cited page is accurate. Double check all of that in addition to doing your normal sentence level revision, paragraph level revision, and then of course your editing, just looking for mistakes, looking for obvious errors that you can clean up. But we definitely want to clean up any citation errors because those can be especially costly. Okay, and just one more thing you can look at in this week's module, that quote sandwich document is designed to help us write direct quotations. So when we do want to quote our sources, when we want to use the words of others, but we want to use their actual words, we want to capture those actual testimonials, and we want to quote, you need to use the concept known as the quote sandwich. You got to introduce your quote, and then you often need to explain that quote. Okay? So if you're planning on providing direct quotations, and it would be good to have at least one or maybe two in your paper, use that quote sandwich document. It just gives you some examples of how to build a quote sandwich, just using the sandwich as a metaphor. You introduce the quote, that's your top slice of bread. The quote itself is the meat of the sandwich, and then your explanation or your follow-up to that quote is the bottom slice of bread. So just use that to help you with direct quotations. Look at my citation help document. Again, if you have any questions, email me. If you want to send me a draft earlier, before the end of the week, you can do that. Reach out. We can have a video conference. We can exchange emails. I'm here to help. Good luck. I've had a great semester. I hope you guys have had a pretty good time and learned a few things. But don't forget, I'm still available. I'm still a resource to help you with whatever you need this week, or at least the early part of next week. So if I don't hear from you, have a great winter break and good luck with everything.